Welcome to the October 2024 update for the Milwaukee Estuary Area of Concern Dredged Material Management Facility. I'm Bridget Henk. I am a Senior Project Manager with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, and I'm the lead project manager for this project. Today we're going to talk about the Milwaukee Area of Concern, just a refresher on what that is, a refresher on our sediment removal, and then we'll talk a little bit about our dredged material management facility, both the design and then our construction to date. Starting with our area of concern refresher, in the 1980s, 43 degraded areas were identified by the United States and Canada as areas of concern. An area of concern has at least one beneficial use impairment, which means that the water body has undergone a change in its chemical, physical, or biological integrity. The United States and Canada areas of concern are shown on the map on your screen. In Wisconsin, we have 5 areas of concern. We have the St. Louis River, the Lower Menominee River, Lower Green Bay and Fox River, Sheboygan River and Harbor, and the Milwaukee Estuary. On the map on the right shows our Milwaukee Estuary area of concern. The water bodies are shown in gold and the watersheds shown in blue. The water bodies include the Kinnickinnic River, the Milwaukee River, the Menominee River, and the Milwaukee Bay. Milwaukee became an area of concern because of our years of heavy industrial use along our waterways. We were formerly known as the machine shop of the world. This meant that a lot of heavy industry was located along our riverfronts and our lakefront, and they ultimately used our waterways as open sewers, discharging chemicals, waste products, heavy metals, and that sediment is still in our waterways today. Addressing that contaminated sediment will make our waterways better for both humans and wildlife. Unfortunately, we can't go back to those industries because they're no longer here. So the federal government and our non-federal sponsors are working together to remove that contamination from our waterways as part of our delisting of our area of concern. In order to delist an area of concern, you need a lot of partners. And these partners are calling ourselves the Waterway Restoration Partnership. They include local governments, the federal government, non-government organizations, nonprofits, and pretty much anyone who's involved with water in southeastern Wisconsin. If you want more information on the sediment removal and the work that we are doing as part of our AOC delisting, go to mkewaterwaypartners.org. Sediment removal is a key component of delisting our area of concern. This part of the project is being led by the EPA and is in the feasibility study phase of the work, which means that they are starting to develop the plans of how exactly they're going to remove the sediment. The EPA is leading the effort for sediment removal, and they have identified several areas where sediment will need to be removed. They've done sampling of that sediment, and they are starting to put together the planning for how the sediment will be removed from each of these sections, how it will be accessed, and what to expect during the sediment removal. Go to the mkewaterwaypartners.org for more information about the specific sediment removal in the colored areas shown on the map on your screen. The majority of the sediment is planned to be removed using something called a hydraulic dredge. This essentially is an underwater vacuum that sucks up the contaminated sediment from the bottom and discharges it through a pipe system directly to the Dredged Material Management Facility. In some areas, we can't use a hydraulic dredge, and we will use a mechanical dredging operation, which is more conventionally known as the clamshell that grabs the sediment and puts it on a barge to dewater and then loads it onto a truck and hauls it over land to the DMMF. More information about the hydraulic dredging and mechanical dredging can also be found on the mkewaterwaypartners.org website. Now that we've talked a little bit about the area of concern and the sediment removal, we're going to move into talking about the Dredged Material Management Facility, or DMMF. The Dredged Material Management Facility is designed to hold 1.9 million cubic yards of sediment and floodplain soils removed from the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers and the Milwaukee Bay. It's proposed to be just north of the existing sediment facility and south of the Jones Island Water Reclamation Facility and Summerfest. It's shown on the map in blue. In 2020, we began the design, and in 2024, we began the construction. We anticipate the construction to be completed in 2027. The Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District began our part of the Dredged Material Management Facility construction with a concept plan. Initially, the concept had only two walls, one on the north side of the facility and one on the east side of the facility. Originally, it was proposed to be a cellular cofferdam system with each of the interlocks of the steel sealed to provide the contaminant containment throughout the facility. In early 2021, MMSD did a request for proposal for the final design services. In December of 2021, the Dredged Material Management Facility final design contract was awarded to Ramble Engineering Americas right here in Milwaukee. The first task for the Ramble team was to look at existing facilities in the area and on the Great Lakes, and we came across a facility at Randall Reef in Hamilton Harbor in Ontario, Canada, that was very similar to what we had proposed to build here in Milwaukee. We had some very collaborative meetings with the Randall Reef team and were able to even tour the facility this July. The proposed dredged material management facility is located in Port Milwaukee, just north of the existing facility. On the east side, we have the navigational channel. On the north side is the liquid cargo pier, and on the west side is the existing dock wall. What that means for our proposed facility is that on the west side and the south side, we only need a single wall of steel. The existing facilities serve as the other side of our facility. On the north and the east side, where there is existing lake, we need two rows of steel. So we'll have a north interior wall and a north outer wall. And then we'll also have an east interior wall and an east outer wall. These walls are considered a combination wall and will be a combination of king piles or circular piles and steel sheet piles, which are the Z-shaped piles that you see along our existing dock walls. The construction of the facility began in April 2024. The contractor is Michaels, who is also based here in Milwaukee. They're doing the majority of the work from barges on the water. You can see two of those barges along our north outer wall in the photo in front of you. You can also see some of that combination wall. So we have circular piles with sheet piles in between them. The contractor is putting in the circular piles first and then coming back and putting in the sheet piles. So if you take a look over at the north wall, you can see just the circular piles without the sheets in between them. Each one of the circular piles, or king piles, is 4.5 feet in diameter. They range from 60 feet to 85 feet long. You can get a real scale of how large this pipe pile is based on the two workers that are at the base of the pile. You can also get an idea of the scale based on those white lines along the side. Each one of those is a foot. So this is showing that this is a 60-foot long pile. It's being installed by a vibratory hammer. So that hammer just vibrates it into place until it is at the same elevation of the one right next to it. That's where those white lines come in handy to know how far they have to go. We also have surveyors that are verifying its vertical location and its horizontal location to make sure it's in the right place. Once the king piles are in place and aligned, the contractor is putting in the sheet piles. You can see a picture of what a whole row of sheet piles looks like in the foreground, and then the installation of our sheet piles between the king piles in the background. So how the contractor is doing this is they are picking up each of these sheet piles off the barge, sliding them into place, then moving on to the next one. So these are as far as those piles will go just by gravity alone. Then they come back with that vibratory hammer and vibrate them so that they're at the same height as all of the king piles. We will now take a moment to watch a time lapse from one of our construction cameras to watch the installation of both the west wall and the south wall. So in the foreground, you see another crew has arrived and are removing an obstruction, while the other crew works on the south side of the facility. Now the obstruction has been removed, and the first crew is finishing up the south side wall, and will move over to the west side to finish that wall. As they move along, they're moving their template along that helps them keep the wall in line as they go. With any work in the waterway or underground, we would expect that there are some things that are in our way. We call those obstructions. In this case, we had some existing dock wall that had been bent over into the lake in probably the 1980s. That wall needed to be removed to allow us to maintain our alignment and maintain the amount of capacity we wanted in the facility. So we had divers come and use an underwater torch to cut off sections of that dock wall so it could be removed. The photo on your screen shows the excavator picking up a chunk of that dock wall and putting it on the barge. So today we've talked about what is an area of concern, what the sediment removal is, and basically the construction of the walls of the Dredged Material Management Facility. But there's a lot of work left to be done on the physical construction of the facility. Once the walls are complete, the area between the walls is going to be filled with aggregate or rock. It's going to be a smaller aggregate, more like a sand, throughout the entirety of the facility. Once the aggregate is placed, then we will be adding a tie rod between the dual wall areas of the facility to help hold the facility together. The tie rods and the steel is more for containment than it is for loading. So a different application than maybe you typically see with piles. Once the tie rods are in place and the aggregate is in place, we're going to put something in called a soil mix cutoff wall. This soil mix wall is actually what prevents the transport of chemicals through the facility. It will be 2.5 to 3 foot thick around the entire perimeter and will be made out of the aggregate, blast furnace slag, fly ash, and bentonite, and that will make the impermeable barrier. Once we have an impermeable barrier in there, we will need a perimeter drain to help manage the water, to make sure that the water on the inside can be different than the water on the outside and give us some opportunities for pumping and water containment and treatment. So going back to the photo from earlier, the area between the existing dock wall and the new wall will be filled with that sandy aggregate all the way around the facility. So you can see that's a pretty significant space. We are going to see some dump trucks coming in with that sandy material. It is locally sourced. There are several quarries that Michaels intends to bring that sand rock fill from. Once that sand is in place, then next year we plan to see the installation of that soil mix cutoff wall and completion of the drive area on top of that sandy fill. Once that is all complete, then the EPA will come through and actually do the dredging operations. A bit more on that timeline. So we talked about the design of the Dredged Material Management Facility happened between 2020 and 2023. Between 2024 and 2027, we will be constructing the Dredged Material Management Facility. Once constructed, we turn over the long-term care and operation to the City of Milwaukee. Concurrently, the EPA can begin filling the facility. It is estimated that the EPA will finish filling in approximately 2031, give or take. Once the facility is filled, that material needs time to settle and for the water to be removed. That would take about 10 to 15 years, depending on the material and how much water needs to be removed from that material. During that time, more capacity will be created through that settlement and the removal of the water for MMSD and Port Milwaukee projects. Both MMSD and the Port of Milwaukee do not have specific projects in mind for our capacity in the facility. This really depends on how much space is available, which projects we're working on, and whether or not the material being removed from those projects is appropriate for the DMMF. That means that it could take 25 to 50 years for the facility to be full and for the final capping and cover to take place. We do get asked quite frequently what the future use of the facility is. Since that timeline is so far into the future, a future use has not been determined. But we do know that due to the submerged land grant and the public trust doctrine, it will need to be used for a public purpose. Thank you for your time today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out through the Milwaukee Waterway Restoration Partnership.org website.